phone rang 3 times before Choi Ji-hoon let himself answer it. He was standing in a room full of men who feared him, in the middle of a negotiation that had taken 11 months to arrange, when the number flashed across his screen, a number he had deleted 8 months ago and somehow still remembered by heart. His hand did not shake, his voice did not change, but something behind his eyes went very, very still. "Speak," he said. A woman's voice, breathless, frightened, not the voice he expected. "Mr. Choi, this is St. Mary's Hospital in Los Angeles. We have a patient here, Amaka Nwosu. She listed you as emergency contact for her children. She's asking for you." She said, "Sir, she says you're the father." The room did not move. The men around the table did not breathe. Choi Ji-hoon, boss of the Choi line, a man who had buried rivals without blinking, felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Children," he repeated, plural. "Twins, sir. She's been in labor complications since this morning. She's lost a lot of blood. She keeps saying your name." He was already moving before the call ended, already shrugging off the men who tried to ask what was wrong, already pulling car keys from a stunned assistant's hand. 8 months since the divorce papers. 8 months since Amaka had walked out of his penthouse with 2 suitcases and a silence so complete it had felt like a verdict. She had never once mentioned being pregnant. Not on the day she left, not in a single message since. And now there were 2 children in a hospital bed 3,000 miles from Seoul and a dying woman calling his name. If you're watching this from somewhere far from home tonight, drop your city in the comments below. You're not alone in this story. And if secrets like this keep you up at night, wondering how anyone survives them, hit subscribe, because this one is going to break your heart before it puts it back together. The drive to the hospital was the longest hour of Ji-hoon's life. He kept replaying the last months of his marriage. The fights that came from nowhere, the way Amaka had started flinching whenever his phone rang, the way she'd stopped eating dinner with him, claiming exhaustion. He had thought she was falling out of love. He had let his pride convince him she simply didn't want him anymore. He had signed the papers without a single question, because a man like him did not beg. He had been wrong. He understood that now, with a certainty that felt like a blade turning slowly in his chest. Amaka Nwosu had grown up the daughter of a Nigerian pastor in Atlanta, a woman who believed in second chances the way other people believed in gravity, completely without needing proof. She had met Choi Ji-hoon in a hotel lobby in Seoul 4 years ago, both of them waiting out a typhoon delay, both of them lonely in ways neither wanted to admit. She hadn't known that first night that the quiet, courteous man buying her coffee ran an empire built on blood and silence. By the time she found out, she was already in love. And love, she used to say, makes fools of the smartest women. They had married in 6 months. It had been a fairy tale for exactly 2 years. Until the threat started. Until she found a bullet casing on their bedroom windowsill with a note that simply read, "Leave or we take everything you love." Until she realized that loving Choi Ji-hoon meant loving a target on her own back. She had never told him about the note. She had never told him about the pregnancy test she took 3 weeks before she left, sitting alone on the bathroom floor of a penthouse she no longer felt safe in, crying so hard she thought she might be sick. She had made a choice that night that she believed would save her children's lives. She had chosen to disappear. Ji-hoon arrived at the hospital to find security already waiting, alerted by his assistant, nervous men in scrubs who had never had to manage a man like him in their quarters. He didn't care about protocol. He pushed past them, following the sound of his own name shouted down a hallway until he reached a door where a nurse stood blocking his path with both hands raised. "Sir, she's in surgery. She hemorrhaged after delivery. They're doing everything they can." "And the children?" The nurse hesitated in a way that made his stomach drop. "They're stable. But sir, there's something you should know before you see them." He stared at her, and for the first time in years, Choi Ji-hoon felt something close to fear. The nurse led him to a small viewing room where 2 incubators sat side by side, twin heart monitors blinking in soft green rhythm. Inside lay a boy and a girl, impossibly small, their skin a warm blend of 2 continents, their tiny fists curled like they were already fighting for something. Ji-hoon pressed his palm to the glass and felt his throat close. "They're beautiful," he whispered, and meant it with his whole ruined heart. "Sir," the nurse said carefully, "the boy was born with a rare blood condition, erythroblastosis, a severe Rh incompatibility. It's the reason Ms. Nwosu's labor became so dangerous. But there's something in his blood work that doesn't match standard Korean or Nigerian genetic markers. The lab flagged it for a specialist. They think it may be connected to a hereditary condition traced only within a handful of known families. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened. Which families? The nurse swallowed. The report references a case file linked to the Han bloodline, sir. I don't know what that means to you, but the specialist said it's extremely rare and extremely specific. The Han bloodline. The name hit Ji-hoon like a fist to the ribs because the Han family was not simply another Seoul dynasty. The Han family was the reason he had inherited his empire soaked in blood in the first place. 20 years ago, the Hans had tried to erase the Choi name from existence, and only a brutal, silent war had stopped them. He had believed that war long buried. If his son's blood carried a marker tied to the Hans, then either history had repeated itself in a way he could not yet understand, or someone, somewhere, had been lying to him for a very long time. He looked back through the glass at his children and understood, with cold clarity, that the phone call that brought him here was not the beginning of this story. It was only the moment he'd finally been allowed to see it. Tell me honestly in the comments, would you have signed those divorce papers without asking a single question? Like this video if you're already feeling for Amaka, because what happens next is going to test every bit of sympathy you have left. 3 hours later, a surgeon stepped into the waiting room with a mask still hanging around her neck and blood on her sleeve, and told Choi Ji-hoon that Amaka Nwosu had survived. Barely. She would live, but she would need to rest, and she was asking, again, only for him. He found her in a recovery room lit low in blue, a woman he had once memorized every inch of, now pale and thin in a hospital gown, an IV taped to the back of her hand. Her eyes opened when the door clicked shut, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. "You came," she said finally, her voice raw. "You had my children," he said, "and you said nothing." She flinched like he had struck her, and tears slid sideways into her hair before she could stop them. "I said nothing because saying something would have gotten them killed, Ji-hoon. Do you understand that? I left to save them. I left to save you." "Save me from what?" "From choosing between your empire and your family. I know you, Ji-hoon. I knew that if I told you, you would have tried to protect us the only way you know how, with more violence, more enemies, more blood. I couldn't watch that happen to my children before they even took their first breath." His hands curled into fists at his sides. "So instead you let me believe you stopped loving me. You let me sign papers ending our marriage without telling me I had a family growing inside you. I had no choice." "There is always a choice," he said, low and furious. Though the fury wasn't really at her. It was at himself, at 8 wasted months. At every night he had lain awake in an empty bed convinced he had simply failed to be enough. "You could have trusted me." "Trust you?" Her voice cracked and something old and painful surfaced in her eyes. "Ji-hoon, 3 weeks before I left, someone broke into our home and left a bullet on our windowsill. A note that said they would take everything I loved. I was already pregnant. I had to choose between trusting you and protecting the only thing I had left that was purely good. I chose my children. I would choose them again." The room went silent except for the soft mechanical beep of her monitor. Ji-hoon sat slowly on the edge of the bed, his anger draining into something heavier, something closer to grief. "Who sent the note?" he asked quietly. It wasn't really a question. It was a demand wearing the shape of one. Amaka's eyes darted, just slightly toward the door, toward the hallway, toward a fear she had clearly been carrying alone for far too long. "I don't know for certain," she whispered, "but the handwriting, Ji-hoon, I've seen it before, on old birthday cards, in your mother's study." Ji-hoon felt the blood leave his face. If this story is making your chest tight right now, that's exactly what it's meant to do. Comment the word trust below if you believe Amaka made the right choice, and hit subscribe if you can't look away from stories where the people closest to us hide the deepest secrets. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in a chair beside Amaka's bed while she drifted in and out of exhausted sleep, and he thought about his mother. Choi Ji-hoon, a woman as elegant as she was ruthless, a woman who had raised him alone after his father's assassination and taught him that love was a luxury men in their position could rarely afford. He thought about the way she had reacted when he first brought Amaka home, the too perfect smile, the compliments that always carried a blade beneath them. He thought about the Han bloodline marker in his son's blood and the note on his windowsill, and slowly, terribly, the pieces began arranging themselves into a shape he did not want to see. 20 years ago, the war between the Choi and Han families had ended, not because the Chois won outright, but because of a secret peace his mother had brokered. A peace no one, not even Ji-hoon, had ever been allowed to see the terms of. What if the terms had included more than territory? What if his mother had promised something, or someone, to end that war, and had spent 2 decades making sure the debt stayed buried? What if Amaka, without knowing it, had married into a secret his mother had killed to protect? By morning he had a plan, and it began with a single phone call to a woman he had once trusted with his life. "Mother," he said when she picked up, his voice carefully flat, "I need you to come to Los Angeles. There's someone I want you to meet." There was a pause on the line, the smallest, most human pause he had ever heard from his mother, before she answered. "Is it about the twins?" Ji-hoon closed his eyes. He had not told her about the twins. No one outside that hospital floor knew about the twins. "How do you know about my children?" he said, and his voice, for the first time in years, shook. His mother didn't answer right away, and in that silence, Ji-hoon understood that the story he thought he was living, a story about a broken marriage and a hidden pregnancy, had never been that story at all. It had always been about something older, something buried, something his mother had spent 20 years making sure he never learned. The truth was coming, whether he was ready for it or not, and it would not just rewrite the last 8 months of his life. It would rewrite all of it. If you felt your stomach drop with that reveal, you're exactly where this story wants you. Subscribe now if twist-filled sagas like this one keep you hooked, because the next part is where everything changes. Amaka woke to find Ji-hoon standing at the window, his back rigid, his phone still in his hand like he was afraid to put it down. She didn't need to ask what was wrong. She had learned over 4 years to read the particular stillness of a man preparing for war. "She knew," Amaka said softly. "Didn't she? Your mother knew about the babies before you did." Ji-hoon turned, and the look on his face was one she had never seen on him before. Not fury, not grief, but the disoriented shock of a man discovering the ground beneath him had never been solid at all. "She's flying in tonight," he said, "and she's bringing someone with her. Someone she says has been waiting 20 years for this moment." "Who?" "I don't know, but Amaka." He crossed the room and knelt beside her bed, taking her hand in both of his, like it was the only steady thing left in the world. "Whatever this is, whatever my mother has been hiding, I need you to know that I believe you now. I should have trusted you the day you walked away instead of letting my pride sign those papers. I am not going to make that mistake again. Not with you. Not with our children." Amaka's eyes filled, but she held his gaze, and for the first time in 8 months, something in her chest that had been clenched tight since the day she'd fled finally began to loosen. "Then don't let go," she whispered. "Whatever walks through that door tonight, don't let go of us." He pressed his forehead to her hand and made a promise he intended to keep with his life. That evening, Choi Ji-hoon arrived at the hospital not alone, but flanked by a woman Ji-hoon had never seen before. A woman in her 50s, sharp-eyed, dressed simply, who stopped in the doorway and stared at the twins through the nursery glass with an expression of raw, unguarded longing that made no sense at all until his mother finally spoke. "Ji-hoon," she said quietly, "this is Han Mi-suk. 20 years ago, to end the war between our families, I made her a promise. I told her that if she gave up her claim to the Han inheritance and disappeared, one day her bloodline would be restored through mine, through a child of my child. I never imagined it would happen like this. I never imagined you would find your way back to her family without either of us arranging it." Ji-hoon stared at the woman, then at the twins, then at his mother, the shape of 20 years of silence finally fully visible. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that Amaka's children carrying Han blood was not an accident, that some part of this, meeting her, marrying her, was set in motion before I was even born. Fate has a strange sense of irony. his mother said, and for once, there was no calculation in her voice, only something close to exhaustion. I sent no bullet, Ji-hoon. I sent no threat. That note on your windowsill did not come from me, but I believe I know who it came from. Someone who has spent 20 years afraid that this exact reunion would happen. Someone who still believes the old war should never have ended. Somewhere in the hospital, an alarm went off, distant and sharp, and Ji-hoon felt every instinct in his body go cold. Because if someone had been watching them closely enough to know about a secret promise made 2 decades ago, closely enough to threaten Amaka before she even gave birth, then that person likely knew exactly where his newborn children were sleeping tonight, and he had no idea yet how close the danger truly was. If you think the biggest threat is still coming, comment "not over yet," and like this video if this story has you holding your breath, because we're heading into the most dangerous part of Amaka and Ji-hoon's story next. The lockdown lasted 11 tense minutes before hospital security confirmed it was a false alarm triggered by a faulty smoke sensor 2 floors down. But 11 minutes was long enough for Ji-hoon to place armed men he trusted at every exit, long enough for Han Mi-suk to reveal, in hurried, frightened whispers, the name of the one person from the old war who had never accepted its ending. A cousin, Han Do-yoon, who had spent 2 decades in quiet exile insisting that peace with the Chois was a betrayal of everyone their family had lost. A man who had, Mi-suk admitted with shame, reached out to her only weeks ago, asking pointed questions about Amaka, about the pregnancy, about whether the child of the promised reunion might finally be born. Ji-hoon didn't wait for confirmation. He had survived this world long enough to know that when the last person standing from a buried war starts asking questions about your children, you do not wait to find out his intentions. By midnight, they had moved Amaka and the twins to a private, heavily guarded recovery suite. By 1 in the morning, Ji-hoon's men had confirmed that Han Do-yoon had flown into Los Angeles 2 days earlier. 2 days before the hospital ever called Ji-hoon, 2 days before Amaka's labor began, which meant someone had known she was going into labor before it happened, which meant someone close to Amaka, someone she trusted, had been feeding Do-yoon information for months. Amaka's face went white when Ji-hoon told her, and it took her a long, trembling moment before she spoke the name out loud. Grace, she whispered, my sister-in-law. She's the only person who knew where I was this whole time. She helped me disappear, Ji-hoon. She found the apartment. She got me the false name at the clinic. If Do-yoon knew when I went into labor, Grace is the only person it could have come from. The betrayal landed heavier than the threat itself, because Amaka had trusted Grace with the one truth she had told no one else, the truth that had, for 8 months, kept her children alive. She pressed a hand over her mouth, tears sliding freely now, and Ji-hoon sat beside her, wrapping his arms around her shaking shoulders, and made a silent vow that whoever had sold her location for money or fear or old family loyalty was going to answer for it. Not with the old brutal methods he once would have chosen without hesitation, but with something he was only just learning how to offer. Justice, without losing himself in the process. For her. For the children sleeping 3 feet away. For the family he had almost lost before he even knew it existed. We end this, he told her. The right way this time. No more secrets. No more disappearing. Whatever comes next, we face it together, or we don't face it at all. Amaka looked up at him, exhausted, frightened, and impossibly hopeful, and nodded. 3 days later, with the help of Han Mi-suk's testimony and evidence, Ji-hoon's men gathered quietly and lawfully. Han Do-yoon was arrested by federal authorities on charges connected to years of harassment and an interstate stalking case linked to Amaka's file. A resolution that gave Ji-hoon no satisfaction of violence, only the quiet, unfamiliar relief of watching a threat end without another life destroyed. Grace confronted gently rather than punished cruelly, confessed through tears that she had been threatened for months, coerced rather than disloyal, and Amaka, after long nights of anger and longer nights of prayer, found something inside herself large enough to forgive her. 6 weeks later, in a small garden behind the home Ji-hoon had bought under a new name in a city far from both Seoul and old wars, Amaka sat with a twin cradled in each arm, while Ji-hoon knelt in the grass beside her. No bodyguards in sight, No phones ringing, nothing but sunlight and the small, astonished sounds of two children discovering the world. I used to think love was the most dangerous thing I ever survived, Amaka said quietly, watching him press a kiss to their daughter's forehead. Now I think it might be the only thing worth surviving for. Ji-hoon looked up at her, this woman who had carried an impossible secret alone to save the family he almost lost the chance to know, and understood at last the lesson buried inside every hard year of his life. That empires built on silence eventually collapse, but a family built on truth, however late it arrives, can still stand. If this story moved you the way it moved us to write it, subscribe, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always finds its way home. And tell us in the comments the biggest lesson you're taking with you tonight. Because sometimes the greatest twist in life isn't the secret someone kept. It's the love that survives it anyway.